Hello, and welcome to Introducing Me. I'm your host, Sarah. I started this podcast to get to know other people and lifestyles while discovering more about myself. Each episode, I will give a new guest a chance to discuss their background, culture, interests, or whatever they want to talk about to help increase all of our own worldviews. Today, I would like to introduce you to Stewart. He is a children's book author who is committed to creating content that empowers young kids. His most recent published book is called My Shadow is Purple. He is also a father. He is Australian. Just talking to him for a few minutes, I'm grateful that he is here today. So thank you so much, Scott. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I am I'm a children's book author. I'm a chocolate eater more than any other kind of food, much to the chagrin of my wife, because my son is now becoming that too. I'm just somebody who is extraordinarily passionate about breaking down gender stereotypes. And the reason for that is my son is a young boy who likes things that we have traditionally deemed culturally feminine, so I have put a lot of work into educating and dismantling gender stereotypes for kids, allowing them to be exactly who they are. And some of that creeps into some of my books, but some of my books are also just a whole lot of fun too. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Great. Thank you. So your passion for, kind of breaking down stereotypes and working through all of this, was any of that part of your life before you had your son?
It's really, really funny because I was catching up with my mum recently, and she showed me this cookbook from when I was a kid. And the cookbook was, baking cakes for boys and girls. It's a very weird title, but, and it was split in half. So the first half of the book was baking cakes for boys, and the second half was baking cakes for girls. And on the title page for Baking Cakes for Boys, I, as this little 7-year-old kid, had written "and for girls," and I'd done the same on the second half. But I grew up in an environment with extraordinarily rigid definitions of masculinity. My dad is, really, I love my dad, but he also grew up in an era and location here in Australia that really lent him to having very, what we would term, toxic views around masculinity. The words "I love you" were very rarely said. I never saw him cry. I never saw him really express emotions or talk, really, and it was only recently that we have kind of found our relationship as adults. But growing up around that, there wasn't much space for a young man growing up in that to express himself outside of a very narrow pathway. And fortunately for me, I was a dude who I really thrived inside that narrow pathway. I was a dude who was really great at sports. I was creative. I was good at school. I made friends easily. I was athletic. I enjoyed drinking and going out with the boys, and all that sort of stuff. That's very just the stereotypically dudes. I really enjoyed all of that. And so I was thriving in that environment, but there were parts of myself that I was abandoning to thrive in that environment. I'm an author. Since I was 8 years old, I wanted to be an author. I love writing. I love creating stories. That's not really what guys do in the environment that I was brought up in, despite the fact that, at least half of all the most best-selling authors of all time are men, it was still what else are you going to do? Everything was kind of revolving around, I'm either going to be a professional athlete as long as it is in a couple of predefined acceptable athletic endeavors, or I'm going to work in finance and make billions of dollars. Those were acceptable scenarios. There's also, I could work on a farm, like that was okay. I couldn't be a florist, it was just, there were limited paths that were socially acceptable in the environment I grew up. And so I felt I was kind of sacrificing things that I really loved to fit in. And yet, because I was thriving to a point, things were great to a point, I didn't need to challenge that too much. And then my son was born. And I remember the night he was born, or the day he was born, I wasn't allowed to stay in the hospital. Like, I was kicked out to go home, which is his own story. But, I had to go home for the night while my wife and my son were in hospital. And I was just kind of remembering being this kid who wanted to write books, and wanted to be creative and express myself in those ways. And I thought, well, now there's a little bit of an excuse, because wouldn't it be cool if my son grew up and there was, not a very good book, but there was a book in the world that was written about him. Wouldn't that be cool? And so it just kind of got me over the edge of that, well, I shouldn't be, like, guys aren't creative, but, it got me over that little hump, And so I wrote my first book, a terrible book. It was not that great, but I loved doing it. I loved the process of it. It was everything I had ever wanted. And I said to my wife, man, if I never sell a book, that's okay, because I just love doing this, And so I kept writing. And then my son, as he got to about 3 or 4 years old, he started to fall in love with characters who feminine. He fell in love with Queen Elsa. He fell in love with Scarlet Overkill from Minions. He fell in love with all these things that we have culturally deemed feminine, and started to experience, like, firsthand the prejudice against that. And so, it wasn't a huge part of my life beforehand, except that I had gone as vanilla as possible into this, these two, in between these two lines, even though I was yearning to go outside of those. But when my son was born, and when he really started to express himself in that way, it allowed me to find my own voice, outside of gender stereotypes. This is a ridiculous example. But I was just at Disneyland a few days ago. And firstly, I get motion sickness, so I don't really do roller coasters. But I was on a roller coaster. And it sounds so stupid, but I have always grown up with this idea that men shouldn't make noise on roller coasters. Like, we shouldn't we shouldn't do any of that. But since I have had these years with my son and, teaching him how to fully accept himself, and it's really started to allow me to do the same things. And so I was at Disneyland and we were on this ride and I was like, and I was having the time of my life, But it's just like, it's such a ridiculous, tiny example, but these things like bleed over into everything, from really, really small things like that into really big things like pursuing a career in something that I was always taught was not for men.
And it's great that you have had that opportunity, like, because of your son. Like, it's not, you kind of needed that help, and at the same time, you're helping him. So were you doing something super, quote, unquote, masculine before becoming a children's author?
I mean, I wasn't in the UFC, but my first career when I left school was in finance. I was unable to be the professional, like, football player. Even though I later became a professional dancer, which is, not quite in the masculine realm that I was brought up with. But I knew that I wanted to go into finance, like men make money, so that's where I wanted to go. I generously say it was day 2, but it was really about hour 2 that I realized that I hate that career. I absolutely hated everything about it. I hated just how gray everything was. I hated how boring the whole thing was. It was not for me. And kudos to people who love it. I am not that person. But I stuck with it for, 6 months, 9 months, maybe a year. And because I was like, this is the thing, I've got to do this. Until one day I had to design a little flyer for a mortgage broking client. And I just loved doing that. I had the greatest time ever. And so I quit. I went to art school and I have been a designer / artist, pretty much my entire adult career for 18 years or something. So I started in graphic design, and even up until I stopped to become a full-time author, I was still working in graphic design, but have been in everything from toy design to web design to etc. design. So I mean, it's probably not the most stereotypical masculine career, but I was very proud and happy that I was able to kind of abandon that just for something I loved. Yeah.
And did you ever have any kickback from your parents, either when you switched to design or when your son started to become more interested in feminine things?
Yeah, so definitely when my son was starting to take the leap from owning an Elsa figurine to wearing an Elsa costume. When he wanted to wear those dresses and sparkly things. And my two parents, my mum and my dad, and my dad is this, as I said before, very conservative, grew up on a massive sheep station, like a ranch, I guess, in American terms. My mom is a very progressive, always been a strong feminist, very accepting kind of person. And so when he started to wear those kinds of things, I had zero qualms about introducing him to my mum in that sense, introducing that part of him to my mum. And I thought there would never be any problems there because my mum's super progressive and, all that. Well, my mum is also somebody who grew up around a lot of fear. She was born just after World War II, and her parents kind of raised her in this web of fear. She is somebody who refuses tattoos, not because she doesn't like tattoos, because what if one day there is a genocidal maniac who comes into power and tattoos are the way they decide who's going to live or die, So it's I don't understand it. But anyway, and so when I introduced my son in that form to my mum, what I was expecting was just acceptance and happiness and love and joy. What I got instead was every fear you could imagine. It was, what if he gets bullied? I'm we're just literally here in your house. Who's going to bully you? What if he, what if he starts thinking he's a girl? What if you as parents confuse him and his gender or his sexuality or all those things? And so it became a very big problem in our family. Which was only really resolved when I took my mum aside and I had to have a really strong, filled with boundaries conversation where I said to her, if you cannot accept him for whoever he is, you cannot be in his life at all. And now she's one of his biggest supporters, but going to my dad, I was unbelievably nervous about, introducing this side of my son to him. I was like, I remember sitting on a train with my dad, and a man who was wearing an earring got into the train carriage, and my dad elbowed me and said, check this bloke out. Like, he's got an earring on. So like, let alone, my son wearing a dress, and so my dad lives in another state, and I knew when we were going to visit him, and I'd just been building this thing up in my head for months. And even walking to his front door, I was just running through every scenario in my head. I was running through like everything that he would say and every response I would have to say and all the boundaries I had to place and the drama that was going to ensue and everything. We opened the door, and my dad, looks at my son and goes, "Hey, buddy, nice dress." And that was it. And I was like, God damn it. Amazing. But also I've just been like, this was so much bigger in my head. So we definitely experienced, those kinds of both unexpected acceptance and unexpected prejudice, and prejudice that's kind of wrapped in the guise of love. I love you, so I'm just concerned, you might get bullied, so abandon who you are just in case that happens. I love you and I'm just trying to protect you, and I don't want you to be confused, so give up on anything you love just to make sure that doesn't happen, So we definitely got a lot of that fear-based love, in quotation marks. And then from friends, and extended family, everything from pure acceptance and love to the absolute opposite of that. And it's been a eye-opening experience seeing just how strongly held some of these very outdated opinions are.
And did you, like yourself, when things started to sort of change, ever feel like any of those fears yourself, or any like back into the mindset of when you were younger and kind of that masculinity that you grew up on? Did you feel yourself ever projecting that or worrying?
I talk about this a lot, in that I would love to sit here and say, my son looked at me and said, "Hey, can I get an Elsa dress?" And I was like, of course, that sounds amazing. And we went there on a rainbow road, and all was joy and happiness. That was not the case. My son asked me if he could get an Elsa costume, which was a dress. And I said yes, but I was deeply uncomfortable. And I was uncomfortable because of that upbringing I had, and I thought I was a very accepting person. I thought I was very progressive. I thought that, I didn't hold any of these prejudices. But when my son wanted to do that, suddenly it was all wrapped in these fears. It was wrapped in not just the fears of what if he gets bullied, what if he, what if this is, showing that he is actually, a different gender, or, but it also started to throw fears around, well, how am I going to be perceived as a dad, to all my male friends? How am I going to be perceived as a man? And I would love to say that the concerns for my son were at the forefront, but in reality, I don't think they were. I think I was more concerned about the judgment on myself. I think I was more concerned of the things that my friends and random strangers might say to me, than I was about, any prejudice my son may face. And so he asked, said yes, deeply uncomfortable. And the only reason I said yes was because my wife and I, when he was first born, we had been smart enough to sit down and have a conversation about, well, there's a lot that we cannot control in his life and a lot of influence that we can't control, but there is some. And what would we, like, if we could instill any belief or anything into him, what are the things that we'd really want to instill in him? And like the number one thing from both of us was we want him to be completely free to just be himself, whoever that is. And it's our job as parents to recognize that spark and just like blow on that flame as much as possible. And so in that moment, I had these conflicting things going into my head. I had this discomfort because of the conditioning that had been placed on me like my entire life. But I also had this conscious decision that I want my son to grow up being free to be exactly as himself, feeling loved instead of judged, and to be able to explore, freely. And so said yes, and immediately just started to recognize all this joy in him, because of that decision. And not just that, but started to recognize this deepening of connection between us, and this deepening of trust between us. Because there's really only two things that happen when your son or your child is expressing themselves. If you say yes, like they realize that you are a safe person for them to express themselves to, or you say no and they realize that you are not, and so that trust and that connection just deepened. And as soon as those things started to happen, all those fears and discomfort started to feel a lot less important. And we have just been having the greatest and happiest time ever since.
And how old is your son?
My son is 9 now. Yeah.
So is he still able to like freely express himself outside of home?
Yes. Yeah. So, every person's journey is totally different. My son was totally in love with Elsa and like all the princesses and things like that, and would wear dresses like all the time. Now it's a lot less, but like we were just at Disneyland and he wanted to go costume shopping for the latest Elsa costume to wear at Disneyland. And, so he has complete freedom to express himself outside of the house. We've always been extremely realistic with him around possible negative things that can happen. And when I say realistic, that's often kind of framed as, yeah, you can wear that, but here are the things that might happen. And it's not being realistic. It's really just like trying to convince them not to do the thing. Instead, we've tried to have a very neutral approach, like here's some great things, here's some bad things, what would you like to do? And he has consistently chosen to just do the things that he really loves. And that's in a lot of small ways. Like he was taking dance classes and he's literally the only boy student there, and that had its own dramas because like bunch of the girls were just ridiculous. But anyway, there are times that he wants to wear, an Elsa or a princess dress. There are times we dress up as Batman. There are times that he wears a My Little Pony shirt. There are times that he wears like a Lego shirt. He is completely free to have any interest that he may have, and he knows that, and he leans into it, and he has an extraordinarily diverse set of interests.
And it's great to hear that, he's now 9, he's in school, he's able to, express himself, and, have that freedom. Now, you mentioned when you first started writing the children's books, you wanted to have a story, for your son to, represent him in a book. And you now have multiple books. You've got millions of readers. Do you want to share a little bit about what your authoring journey has been like?
Yeah. We don't need to talk much about that first terrible book that I wrote, because I ended up, self-publishing it, and it sold 3 copies. I'm pretty sure my mum bought 2 of those. But once I, really started to create books that I thought not necessarily needed to be in the world, but might leave the world a better place from having them in it. That's when I really started to see some form of success. My first book that really gained attention was a book called My Shadow is Pink, which is about a young boy who's born with a pink shadow, despite his whole family having blue shadows. And it's this kind of story of acceptance and loving yourself as you are. And when I wrote that story, I tried to get a traditional publisher on board, and I had enormous difficulty. I was, every author gets a billion rejections, so that's not out of the ordinary. But the reasons that it was being rejected were quite harsh. Nobody wants to read a book about a boy in a dress. Nobody's going to read that kind of thing. And so I was fairly committed to self-publishing again. By that time, I'd already self-published 2 books, one of which, Alone, which is a story about planet Earth waking up in the darkness of space, looking for a friend. I'd already self-published that. It had gone really, really well. It'd been a bestseller on Amazon. Not that is a huge thing, but it had done quite well. It had sold, a lot of copies. So when I was trying to get this book published and then decided to self-publish, I'd written another one, which I thought maybe that one could get published. And I'd been going through the process of trying to find an agent and trying to find a publisher. And we had just kind of hit that moment where I had signed on with an agent. And the book that I was pitching was what ultimately became the book, How to Be a Real Man, which I didn't title it that way. My publishers titled that. I would never be so audacious to name a book that, but that's what it was called. At some point, I met another publisher randomly. Very randomly. And they said, can you send us a couple of things? And I sent them a book I had written, another book I'd written, not particularly a fantastic book, but just another book. And as a last minute attachment to that email, I said, and I've also written this book called My Shadow is Pink too. Let me know what you think. I hadn't even shown this book to my agent. I was just like, nobody wants this. I'm going to self-publish it. They replied 6 minutes later and said, yeah, that other book is whatever, but this My Shadow book, let's talk about that, and so that got signed. It was, ultimately the first traditionally published book that came out, even though it was my second signed book. The timing was all kind of weird and gnarly. But once that came out, it's just got a lot of attention, and it got a lot of love and not so much love. And I was just very fortunate that it reached a really large audience around the world. I think it's been over 20 translations or something. It's, many, many countries. And it's had stage production, done of it and all sorts of stuff. And that kind of gave me an opportunity to pursue this thing called being an author. Because I have a billion books in my head, and a billion books half written and fully written. And suddenly I was able to get an email returned by a publisher, because of the success of that book. And I wholeheartedly sent out as many as I could, to keep that thing going. And I am very fortunate to be able to be a full-time author now.
So what is the day-to-day like being a full-time author?
Procrastination. Yeah. Look, I absolutely love it. So I am a full-time author, but there's also this whole marketing thing that has to go along with that. And, a large part of that is social media. I'm a creator on, a couple of platforms. And, there's a lot of work that goes into that I always thought, so you just speak at a camera for 10 minutes and move on with your day. It's hours of work every day, which I did not realize. So my day to day is I have an enormous backlog of projects that I'm working on, an enormous backlog. And I am writing very hard. I generally around 5 a.m. I get up and I start working on a few things. Then I do like school drop off and all that sort of stuff. Then I work through till school pickup, and that's either illustrating or writing. And everybody's authorship thing is different. I write longhand on paper, which is ridiculous. It takes forever. But it works for me, because it makes me slow down my brain a little bit and actually think about what I'm writing. And then I do school pickup, and at that point, I get an extra hour or two of work. There's many, many interviews like this, especially around the time a book launches. If there's a book launch within 2 months, it's just every day you're on interviews or podcasts or Instagram lives, or going to bookstores or schools, or I do a lot of like talks and readings and speeches at schools. So it is. I kind of always had this idea that being an author would be a pretty chilled out life, where you just. Inspiration strikes you like a lightning bolt. Then you write the book for a couple of days, because writing a book can't take more than a couple of days, surely. And then you just get to chill out, watch Netflix or whatever. It turns out it's unbelievably busy, and writing a book takes a fair bit longer than a couple of days. I am just working harder than I think I have ever worked in my life, but I am loving absolutely every second of it, except the bits I don't like. So, yeah.
well, of course, you started the answer with procrastination.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, there's a bit of that in there too.
So I would be remiss to ask you what life is like in Australia. And you've obviously left Australia. You were just in Disneyland. So can you share a little bit about living in Australia, kind of, places you've been and stuff like that?
So my wife is American. She was born in Argentina, but she moved to America when she was about 5 or 6. So she kind of says she's American. And so when we were first together, we did like 6 months a year here, 6 months a year there, and that was not at a time. It was like a week, at a time. It was very many, many flights. So we have spent a lot of time in America, a lot of time here, a lot of time kind of around the world. We used to travel for a living. As my wife is a professional dancer, I was less professional, but still a professional dancer with her. We spend most of our time here in Australia. We had started to really look at holidays and travel and all those sorts of things in 2020. And that obviously changed, through a couple of external factors. And we've just really started really looking at that now. Now that I am fortunate enough to have my books out kind of globally, when we're in America, we can kind of go to bookstores and do some signings and things like that. And my wife, works for a company where they do, some international travel as well. But yeah, Australia, I Australia is the best. I love Australia. It is, in some ways, a very ambitious country, and in other ways, an extraordinarily chilled out country. And it kind of ends up in this kind of interesting yet beautiful middle ground. It's a country with a lot of progressive values underlined with a whole ton of conservative values, which I like some of that and do not like some of that. Very similar to America, and it's a place where I've had my books that have kind of talked about gender stereotypes, like My Shadow is Pink and My Shadow is Purple. They've been widely accepted here and also widely criticized. So exactly the same as America. But the food portions are smaller here. There's less sugar and less oil and stuff in our food. So we were at Disneyland. We were in America for a couple of weeks. Just gotten back and been almost having nothing but green smoothies since, because I'm just trying to recalibrate my body. But no, it's a really great place. We lived down next to the beach for a long time during lockdown, and we had always assumed that. We always had wanted to go and live next to the beach. We assume everybody wants to go live next to the beach, surely. We lived there for 2 weeks and we realized, we're not living at the beach people, and so we kind of had to figure out our move back to the city. But it is I don't know what to say about Australia. I really love it. My wife loves most of it. And my son is at least the thing that really made the decision, because we had to have that conversation at the start, where are we going to live when our son was born? Are we going to raise him in America, or are we going to raise him here, or are we going to do a hybrid kind of combination of both? It was right around the time of Sandy Hook massacre and stuff like that, and we both just had this very immediate, I never want to think about that, and I never want to worry about that happening, to our son. And we're fortunate that that's not really a thing here in Australia. We have very strict gun laws. So there's always a possibility of anything, but it isn't happening, which is good. That was kind of our main reason for being here, and we've just kind of loved it, ever since.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a good thing to love where you live. Do you have any good tricks of when flying from Australia into the States and dealing with the time zones, dealing with the very long plane rides? What's the secret?
Yeah, everybody says it's ridiculously long, and I know it's 16 hours or something. It's not that bad. You sit on the plane, you watch Titanic, you cry, you have a sleep, maybe you watch 2 more movies, and you're there pretty much. So it's not too bad. But yeah, I mean, I guess some things most of the flights land in the morning over there, and so we are very eager to stay awake the whole time. Our son fell asleep in the restaurant the first night we were there, because we were trying to let's get him on to American time. It's never really successful. We just got back a couple of days ago, and I am just dying from exhaustion right now. But yeah, it's I don't know. There's so many differences. Even crossing a street, we have a sound that tells you when the light turns green or turns white in America. And you don't have that in the States. So everybody kind of stands there just waiting, and it's turned and nobody notices for 10 seconds, and then they cross the road. Here you have this telling you that you can cross the road now. Yeah, I don't know. Tips. I mean, there's a million, but because there's so many, I just can't think of any.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners before I start to wrap things up?
That is a really challenging but good, very open-ended question. Look, I'm not sure. I mean, definitely a lot of the things that I have done and spoken about around like gender stereotypes and things like that in parenting, there is obviously, because who knows why, but there's a lot of, often a lot of pushback, and a lot of that pushback is very performative. A lot of it is based around what people are going to think about you and how people are going to perceive you. And I always love just to say, just try some of these things on, just try some acceptance, just try like exploring, outside of really standard roles and stuff. Just try exploring that just inside your own house where nobody can see you, just see what it feels like. Like maybe you're like me and the extraordinarily rigid gender stereotypes don't really work all that well. But if I had to do that out in public with everybody seeing me, I don't think I'd ever have known that, because it's too scary out there, So just like find some safe spaces to explore and allow the people in your life to do the same. And I think everybody will be enormously happy, or at least happier.
Yes, I think that's some great advice. Now, have you ever joined your son in wearing a dress?
Yes, many times. Our first really big thing on social media was my son and I dressed up as Elsa to go to the Frozen 2 cinema movie premiere. I've never really been somebody who wants to put myself out there on socials all that much. And I really didn't want to put my son out there on socials either. And then my wife said to me, she said, Scott, there are probably a whole lot of young boys out there in the world who are not being accepted by their parents, and it'd be really healing for them to see a man accepting their son, breaking gender stereotypes. So, well, when you put it like that, I mean, I guess I should, and so we had enormous conversations with my son around it, and we still do. Anything that he is involved in a post or anything, we have a lot of conversation with him beforehand. And he can say no to absolutely anything, and he does very often. There's often things where I'm like, man, this post would go really, really well. And he's like, no, don't want that ad. I'm like, okay. So we had those conversations, and we put this thing out there about us wearing the dresses together to see the Frozen 2 movie. And, so I woke up the next day and there was like millions and millions of views on it and stuff, and that was really our first introduction to a larger social media world. But yes, this Halloween we are the Sanderson sisters for Halloween from Hocus Pocus. That is our costume, at least for now. It might change, but for right now we have got our Sanderson sisters outfits ready to rock. And there has been many a very stretched Elsa costume worn by me over the last few years.
It's great to hear that you have, kind of gone out of that comfort zone and done that. And also to hear how much you check with your son before you're putting things on social media. I think that's something that sometimes the lines get really blurry and we don't know what's good and what's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's there is a part of your child's life which is really about you and your parenting. But there's also parts that are completely about them and their life and their choices. And sometimes, especially when they're really young, those lines can be really, really blurry. I was immediately aware that if we were going to be talking about breaking gender stereotypes or anything like that, there's a level of kind of online vitriol that comes with that. And opening him up to that needed to be done with an enormous amount of consideration. And, so we took a really, really long time to think about it. And we are constantly thinking about it. We're constantly, in discussion with him and each other around what to share and what not to share. And there's many, many things where, like, if you were just to think about likes and views and stuff, you're like, well, that would get a ton of views and that would get a bunch of followers and all those sorts of things. But is it healthy for him? Is it healthy for our family? And even if it is healthy, do we want it up there, and so it's really, really, really important to have those conversations. And, when the first time he went onto social media, the first time I posted something with him on social media in a more public setting, he was 7 years old. And so he already kind of knew what some of these things were. And we also had to over-exaggerate everything. We're like, this might be seen by everybody in your class, everybody in the world, your teachers, like all your friends might see this, post we're about to do, which isn't really true, but just so that he could understand exactly kind of what we're getting into. And we still have those conversations now. I think it's, I absolutely no judgment on any parent sharing their stuff because almost all parents do. We just happen to have more people listening. But I think it's important to involve them in those conversations, because there's some really beautiful things online. There's some really gnarly things online too. And you've got to be really, really aware of it. I'm unbelievably across it and aware of it and following everything, looking at all research. Like, he's not allowed to use social media yet. He's not allowed to read a single comment. He's not allowed to, like, we might watch some videos and stuff together, but, absolutely not being, a part of that world just yet. So, it's a lot of responsibility, and sometimes you'll make decisions that are the wrong decisions and sometimes you'll make the right ones, but that's just part of it.
I think that's a great note to start to wrap up on. I think it is so important for people to hear. Now, at the end of all of my episodes, I do ask my guests a random question. My question for you is, what is the best kind of cheese?
Brie cheese. It is unbelievable. You can barely believe how good it is. It is. It is the best cheese. So brie cheese on like a fig cracker with salami and quince paste. I was just at a friend's house and he knows that the instant he cracks out the cheese board, I turn into a mouse. I love cheese, but brie is the best. Full stop.
All right, that brings this episode to a close. If you would like to check out Scott on social media, I will be leaving his Instagram and his TikTok if you would like to follow those pages. And of course, I will be leaving his website as well, which brings you to all of his books and all of everything that he's got going on, and including some various other media coverage that he's done and good things that he's got going on. So feel free to check all of that out. And if you'd like to connect with the podcast, our website is in the description as well. That brings you to all of our past episodes, all past resources, all past social media guests. And of course, it brings you to our social media. So we are on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So feel free to go follow those pages as well. And if you would like to support the podcast monetarily, a link to do that is in the description. And my email is also in the description if you would like to reach out and be a guest on the show. I always love having new guests. So thank you so much, Scott, for being here today, and to my listeners for taking the time out of your day to hear a new story. Until next time, bye.
See you, everybody. Bye.